Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Matt and Adam, and we're going to be talking about more Abel Ferrara movies. We're kind of doing a crime thing here, and tonight we're talking about China Girl. This is a 1987 Abel Ferrara film with a script by Nicholas St. John, and I'm just going to read the IMDb breakdown. It's a modern-day Romeo and Juliet story told in New York when an Italian boy and a Chinese girl become lovers, causing a tragic conflict between ethnic gangs. And I think that is a fairly decent synopsis, though it probably misses some of the details that make it good. But yeah, so I don't know what was everybody's reaction to this movie?
Slick, beautiful visually.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's got a very nice aesthetic to it. It's interesting in that it's a movie that, as you say, it is very slick and visual. It has a really strong 80s, almost kind of MTV music video vibe and very stylized. But at the same time, it's really grounded and gritty at the same time. It's an interesting balancing act it pulls off by having both of those elements.
It's interesting that you mentioned music video because when I was talking, I took some notes, and one of my notes about the romantic subplot, which I liked, but I felt like what made it work was that number one, they had chemistry, but number two, it had like a music video love story quality to it, where I don't know, I felt like it was more about the visuals and the style. Do you know what I mean? Like the way that they're introduced in the dance hall, that kind of thing.
Yes.
The way the role that background music plays, all that kind of stuff. It just felt like it worked, but in an 80s music video kind of way, which I thought was part of its charm. I didn't think that was like a knock on the love story.
No. And it is like a teenage love story too. So it's not like I have to convince you this is a true love that will last forever. It's a very emotional, they're swept up in this thing kind of love story anyway. So it's a good way to handle it.
That's actually an interesting topic because I do think you're onto something where you just have to buy that this is puppy love or that they're like there's a strong enough mutual attraction that they're both drawn out of their respective worlds, and that leads to the conflict that ensues. So, and also I think the love angle of this is, they're in love, but they're also both sort of responding to the constraints of their environment, where they are equally imprisoned by living in like they each live in like a small block in New York City, basically, with a very narrow cultural experience. And I think both of them really want to see more of what's out in the world, and their environments are kind of, not allowing that to happen. That's kind of the
well, it's interesting because obviously you've got Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story as both influences, but this goes, even though being New York City, you think, oh, West Side Story is the big influence, but by making them both kind of part attached to these crime families in their respective things, it actually makes it more like Romeo and Juliet, where instead of being just street gangs, it's like they are part of this more elite crime structure that's it's controlling parts of the city. So it did have a very Romeo and Juliet feel to me.
And they even did, I think they were smart to really lean into sort of the familial element of that, where it's not just a like, this is your crime family. This is the guy's actual brother. This is the girl's actual brother. There's like a beautiful symmetry on both sides of the movie, where every character kind of has a counterpoint on the other side. And I think that, I don't know, I found that a really, I don't know, I just liked that. It was, because when you would sort of start analyzing one character on one side of the fence, you instantly kind of go to his counterpoint or her counterpoint, and it would just lead you to sort of a deeper appreciation of things.
Both the brothers were interesting characters. It would have been easy to make either of them just the villain who's keeping them apart. But was I always that, Matt?
Yeah. Oh, well, both cultures, Italian and Chinese, are very family-centered cultures too.
Yeah, I agree. that was well represented in the movie.
Yeah, no, that definitely, and I think that also kind of helps explain some of the mutual attraction too, where there's like enough, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
there's compatibility there. Um,
Well, of
and
course,
yeah,
you have in the older generation, they have just started working together. They're like, yeah, we're all in the same business here. Let's let's work together. So the connection really does exist there.
and now, what did you guys think of the
That they were.
what did you think of the gangster element of the movie?
It, it was fascinating.
I think it's great.
Oh, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Oh, it's just it's something that Ferrara always did well, but it also adds authenticity because there were a lot of gang wars going on in Chinatown in the late 80s. The stuff isn't all that far-fetched. He plugs all of that stuff in together. It's amazing what they did with the material actually. And again, he had his regular crew, Nikki St. John, Anthony Redmond editing it, Bojan Bazelli doing the photography, and Joe D'Elia doing the music. It's an Abel Ferrara film.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I really underestimated it when it came out. I can remember when it came out in the 80s, seeing the ads or seeing bits of it on cable, not even really trying to watch it, just it being on cable in the background kind of thing. And I mean, from the ads, I just thought, oh, okay, they're just doing kind of another Romeo and Juliet, blah, blah, but it's gangs, blah, blah. Yeah, it's already been done. And I was just completely unimpressed. But it's the best possible version of that idea. It's just done flawlessly. I really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, I like how they intertwine those two things. With the gang violence, I thought that what was interesting to me about it, and I guess this kind of gets to Matt's point, is, I mean, obviously it is stylized. There's a degree of that, and I can't speak. I don't know anything about Chinatown gangs, but I felt like the Italian stuff was believable enough. Like it worked, and it felt like it was taken out of something authentic, even if it was stylized. But when it came to the violence, what I liked was the violence felt like they were getting just up to the edge of, I don't know how to put it, but like, the movies where it's like the guy gets hit with the bat too many times and it just seems ridiculous, like he should have a broken rib or something.
Yeah.
They don't cross that line, but they get close enough to it that the action is exciting, but it feels real somehow. Do you know what I mean? So it's not so gritty that it's dull and grotesque, but it feels like, okay, these are like real young people having real violent encounters, and they don't have a real sense of consequence yet. And I like that, because when the guy pulls out the gun and that suddenly changes things on a dime, that's like an interesting moment in the film. And the initial scene, I thought, where the what's the Tony, is he the main character? So when Tony is running away from the Chinese gang, and then he goes up to the chain link fence, and it's almost kind of like a stereotypical type of gangland scene, but it really worked. Like I know that I've seen this scene in other movies, but I love the way it was done, and I love the way David Caruso carries that scene when he shows up. That just him chuckling as like he's just so excited to get into a fight. It's just that it just really worked for me. Because it's, what it is? It's like, it's the right balance for a movie that's about people who aren't quite adults yet that are engaged in violence. I think that's what it is. It's there's like enough lack of awareness of what they're actually getting into, that it works. And also just the way that it plays out the consequences of people's choices in the movie is also really interesting. Like, just to take and again, spoilers, but the way this movie ends is, I think, really effective, because it puts it into proper tragedy you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
it's not just like a violent gangster movie. This is like it's like Shakespearean, kind of like Adam was saying. It's more in
Yeah.
the Romeo and Juliet mold. And so the final scene when the I forget who was the guy who shoots them at the end. What was the character?
He
Joey Chin.
was.
So
Joey
when
Chin.
it was Joey Chin. So when Joey Chin um, shoots them both, and they both die, and then what is Young the name of the kind of like uh, the captain in the Chinese mafia? I don't remember what his
Yeah.
actual title was, but her brother when he shows
Yeah.
up, that's all
Yes.
a direct product of a decision he made to not do what the uncles told him to do. Do you know what I mean? And it was a
Yeah.
totally
Yeah, you're
understandable
right.
decision. It was like,
Yeah.
when he's first given
Yeah.
that order, you're like, okay, yeah, he better follow this order. Then he goes, and then they kind of like the Joey Chin character plays the cousin card, and I don't know. I found that I was sort of suddenly on Joey Chin's side because it wasn't this simplistic thing where like the uncle was right and Joey Chin was wrong, or the uncle was wrong and Joey
Yeah.
Chin was right. They both had legitimate motives that they were trying to achieve, and they both made sense. And then by the end, it just kind of all spiraled out of control. But they were all products of people's choices.
Yeah, it was interesting, the
Yeah,
resentment that
Very
the.
Shakespearean.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, yeah, it's very Shakespearean. Yeah, it's very Shakespearean.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on the fact, of course, that the ending is the result of him not killing Joey Chin there. That didn't quite strike me. I just watched it about an hour ago, so it's like it's still fresh in my mind. But yeah, that's a really good observation.
Well,
And
and I think
what's interesting too is that it's not entirely like the two young lovers set this all off, because the real precipitating incident is that restaurant opening up in the Italian area. That's a Chinese restaurant, and that's what really sets there. It's just kind of unfortunate timing. This romance is going on at the same time all of this is heating up, and they're feeding off each other. That was an interesting element of the movie.
I think the romance brings up all these other things that are boiling beneath the surface, like you're saying, and not just the restaurant, but just like all of these cultural issues, like basically Little Italy is kind of shrinking, is the idea, and Chinatown is expanding a bit, but there's also cultural issues around like how people feel about being Americanized and all that, and so and so I think all that's kind of coming up from under the surface. And also, like to go back to the restaurant, that's how the movie opens. It's one of the reasons the movie is so stylistically pleasing. Is they open up with, I don't know how you would describe that opening sequence, but with James Russo with the cigarette at the beginning, and he's watching the sign change, and you can see like all of the Italians kind of reacting to this transition, and you see the family that's opening the restaurant. It also, when that restaurant blows up, having had that opening scene like that really gives weight to what happens at the restaurant when they I forget what they if I don't remember how they blow it up, but they blow it up somehow.
Yeah. Well, that was going on, and even the machine guns. There's a scene with David Caruso. He's firing a machine gun off on the roof of that building, and all that shit was going on in 1986 and 87.
What I like about that scene too, because the machine gun scene is interesting, because at first you see it like, I think he's firing at an empty building, right? Am I mistaken about that? He was shooting at an empty.
He's firing at a building. I don't know.
You don't know if it's
we can hope so.
But just the loss of emotional control that he has in that scene.
He might not.
Yeah, it just kind of gives it. It tells you that this is like about more than whatever preceded that immediate event. You know what I mean? And also, again, I think they do a good job of, you sort of get whatever, like there's different levels of generation in the movie, and you really get what each generation is trying to achieve. And so it does a good job of kind of.
There's another movie.
What was that?
Yeah, there's another movie like this, actually. Yeah, Michael Cimino's Year of the Dragon has the same kind of war going on in it between the young and the old.
What year did
in
that come out?
Chinatown. That was in '85.
85. Okay, that might be
Yeah, it
an
was
interesting.
'85.
That might be an interesting one to
Oliver
do.
Stone.
Yeah, yeah, it does sound good. I haven't
Yeah.
seen that.
I do
It's
remember
good.
that movie coming out. But that would be I think a good maybe I don't know if we should do it immediately after or after we get to some of the other Ferrara movies. But I'd be down
It's
for
great.
that.
There is a difference between both movies. Ferrara's movie was actually shot in Chinatown, whereas Michael Cimino's was shot down in North Carolina.
Oh, okay. That probably. Well, one thing I did notice, and again, I know we have a Chinatown in Boston, and we have our Little Italy is called the North End, and we even have like a saint thing, but it's like a different saint in Boston than it is in New York. So I'm aware of those, but I don't have any sense of the geography of Little Italy in New York or Chinatown in New York. But what this movie did for me was it gave me a real understanding, I felt, of what the geography was that these characters were inhabiting.
Yeah.
And it wasn't done in a way where it's like overt, like they didn't do some kind of thing where they're panning through the streets or they're giving me a headshot. It was like piece by piece, I was starting to be able to cobble together what the actual structure of this area of New York was. It's probably distorted, but
essentially the scene where he runs away, early on or after he dances with the girl, he runs away from the guys back to his own neighborhood. That's essentially the pan scene, but rather than just making it an empty look, we're showing you the setup. They kind of did it as an action scene.
Okay.
So it's plot and it's
That was
explaining geography at the same time. So it's really efficient filmmaking there.
Yeah, I really liked that.
Yeah,
I
it's
like
a
the sense of place. What was that, Matt?
it's a very tight movie. Yeah.
Well, that's another thing about the film is just how tight it is. Like I think I watched it about 2 or 3 weeks ago for the first time, and then last night I rewatched it before this podcast. And I was going to do it either last night or this morning, but I was tired and I almost put it off. But then I started it last night thinking maybe I'll do like 10 minutes. And it's just such an easy watch because it's not a long movie, but it's also just one of these highly efficient. You never really feel like you're waiting for the next thing to happen. It just kind of naturally moves at a pace that works. And
I think too, because every character is interesting in this movie too. There's never a point where you're like, okay, we're dealing with the minor characters doing their busy work to get us to the next scene. It's like whether you're watching the older adults kind of dealing with stuff, whether you're watching the brothers, whether you're watching the lovers, like everything is interesting in this movie. So
yeah, I would agree. Everything is interesting. Every character is a character that you have an interest in. Do you know what I mean? Even like the Joey Chin character and the David Caruso character, those are like maybe the two that you might perceive as like the bad guys of the movie. Even those guys, you're interested in them, and you don't necessarily root against them in the movie. Maybe at the very end, when he gets stomped to death, you're a little bit satisfied that he's getting stomped to death because he just killed them both. But if that hadn't happened, you would have been sympathetic to him, I think. And you're also sympathetic to the James Russo character. Do you know what I mean? And to the Russell Wong character, right?
It's interesting too, because I mean, part of the complexity too is like the young people having kind of the beef with the people running their organizations, because it's like the Italians who moved out to Staten Island are running things, and it's like you're not in Little Italy anymore. You've like moved out to the suburbs, and but they're still running things from this distant position, and it's like they've kind of they almost feel betrayed by the leadership because they're as a real estate agent who sells homes to Italians to get them out of New York City. I guess I'm complicit in all of this, but
well, when you see that pretty clear. There's a good scene where on the other side,
times change.
There's a good scene with what is it, the Russell Wong and the Joey Chin character, where Joey Chin is basically saying like we're like stuck, like we're like, I forget what language he uses, but he invokes fish smells and is like, we're just sort of sitting here in the muck, and they're like, they're living it up. And
Yeah.
before that scene, you feel like he's just being unreasonable. But then when you see that scene, you're like, oh, he has to keep his guys in line, and they're not satisfied. And they basically shed blood on behalf of this organization, and something that must have happened before this. And so there's a legitimate reason why they want to be able to take a piece of that restaurant, for example. He needs the money so that he can satisfy his men. And
yeah, it's the complexity is interesting because their gripe is legitimate within the realm of being a criminal, like being an organized crime. Obviously, all they want to do is rip poor innocent business people off, but they're upset they're not getting a fair cut of this crime that's going on. So it's a really fascinating moral situation there. It's or ethical situation, I should say, not moral.
Yeah. Yeah, it's there's a lot of complexity to the relationships and the story.
Yeah.
And it never stops moving. It's not boring at any point, this movie. Not at all.
No.
I mean, I'll say one thing I noticed too. I think this is the very first Abel Ferrara movie to feature hip hop in it. Frankly.
Oh,
yeah, they had Run DMC. They had Walk This Way.
This Way. Yeah.
Which that really hit nostalgia buttons for me, because that album blew up when I was in elementary school. And every kid had that album. It did, it was so bad. And I remember they put out like a red version and a blue version, and I think they were actually identical in terms of content, but people still bought the two different versions. There might have been some minor difference, I don't know, but yeah, that was absolutely huge. And so to hear that, and also that song is about the coming together of like the rock world and hip hop, and those at the time would have been thought of as like black and white. So there's like this sort of coming together of culture in that music that they're sort of falling in love together. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That was and that was definitely something that you saw in King of New York. So I think that's a good point. You
see that in organized crime a lot. It's, people of various ethnic groups will work together who you would never think they would work together. So.
Yeah, I think having been jumping around his career here, it's like he just always has his finger on the pulse of like what the culture is at that moment the movie came out. They feel very, very of their time. It's impressive. A lot of directors kind of have a time, and all their movies are part of that same time. But he kind of keeps moving with the times as these movies go on.
One thing I really like too is that the San Gennaro feast that they were doing during the there was just something about the way that was paced and interspliced with some of the violence that was unfolding, and sort of the lugubrious music that is sort of helping to build the mood. I really like that, because it was I always forget the term, but that term for when music was diegetic, when the music is what the people themselves are hearing. And I've noticed Ferrara seems to use a lot of that. Like I don't ever notice like the soundtrack music in a Ferrara movie, but I notice the music that the characters are hearing, and that is what kind of gives it the emotional weight. It's a really interesting approach, because I think more often than not, a film usually relies more on sort of the music that's external to the characters. And even going back to Ms. 45, I'm pretty sure with most of the music, maybe with the exception of the music you hear during like the rape sequence, and that continues to replay whenever she goes on a vengeance spree. But at the final scene, that's music the characters are actually hearing, and that kind of threads together the horns that have been playing in the background throughout the movie. So so yeah, I really like that here. I don't know. I just love, and it also kind of calls back to like Godfather 2. You know what I mean? It's just like I don't know. It just felt kind of nice. But
I love it.
What did you guys think of
oh,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's on that's Mulberry Street. that's the stretch through Little Italy from the beginning of it to the end of it.
It's called
And
Mulberry Street.
so I guess they go the length of it for the parade.
It's funny.
Yeah.
The big street here in the North
Yeah.
End is Prince Street. Prince Street is, Prince Pasta. That's where the name comes from because it's made on Prince Street. And when I was watching it the first time, they have the Prince Pasta commercials with Anthony, where the mom's calling him to the. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but I kept thinking it's like kind of like that commercial, but with gangs. Gangs and a love story. But yeah, no. So it really does create that sense of place, I think. What was it? The other thing was the James Hong character. I mean, I really liked his performance in this, especially that scene where he's telling him what's good for the people, and he's like, "Peace is good for the people. Bloodshed is bad." And the way he says it, just the sudden change, I thought was really effective. I also liked the guy who played the Italian gangster, who's like, I don't know if he's supposed to be a capo or if he's supposed to be like a soldier, but the impression I got was that the James Russo character, Albie, is trying to get into the mafia, and he's just like an associate or something. Because at one point he says to him, "Do you want to be a wise guy?" And so I'm assuming that he's not yet a made member, but that this guy is the made member who's their point of contact. And I really liked, I don't know, he was just believable. And he also like sort of walked this nice line between avuncular and criminal that worked for me. In fact, I mean, James Hong too, like that was kind of they were both, even in the literal, like James Hong is literally called an uncle, not his literal uncle, but he's called one of the uncles. And the Italian gangster might as well be an uncle as far as everybody's concerned. Like they're both filling that kind of a role. Which again, it's a very personal type of gangster crime. It's a gangster movie. It's different from King of New York in that respect. Where King of New York is more about, like, the term they might use is like more like a found family type situation. And in this case, even though it's not necessarily your real family, it feels like real family, if that makes sense.
It almost is.
Yeah, it's interesting if you want to bring King of New York into it, I mean, it's that being such a random assortment of criminals, it shows they were such a doomed bunch of people. It's like they weren't part of any of the big crime organizations. They're kind of this random force kind of interjecting into everything. So that kind of looking at these as part of the same setting is interesting, actually.
Yeah, because these are all, I mean, some of them are literal siblings, like, she has a brother, he has a brother, and then all the other guys are basically people they must have grown up with on the block, so they're they're really close to them. I mean, I think James Russo even makes that point to him at one point when he's, because he has the lead character has this very interesting quality of like really pushing back when the other characters are like kind of engaged in racism that I feel was like pretty prevalent in the time the movie was made, like just this sort of, the kinds of slurs they were using against each other and all that. And the lead character, one of his defining traits is that he rejects that. And but when he has to confront the David Caruso character about it, again, it's kind of like they're from the same location. Do you know what I mean? They're from the same place, and so that adds like a layer to it that that wouldn't otherwise be there.
It's complicated because you do have the gang violence between, as they, it's like putting race aside, these are two enemy groups that are butting against each other. So it's like in a lot of cases, it just makes the whole situation, it makes it much harder to be the person who goes, "Hey, stop being racist," because but there are enemies, which I'm not validating that opinion, but it's
but I know what you mean. It adds to the element of they're all sort of subject to this fate that hangs over them. Like there's like this, the forces that are at work in their life are more powerful than their individual desires and personalities, and the lead characters literally have to die to be together. Like that's you know what I mean? Like that's
Well, it's the kind of thing too. It's like is Caruso racist? Does he hate the Chinese because he's racist, or is it because he hates the people in the next neighborhood? He's racist because that's a good way of expressing his hatred. It's. I mean, I'm sure he's racist, but if you see my point, it's just like the way these things kind of. There's this complexity of different types of hatred there.
Here's my impression of the dynamic. He basically pairs with the Joey Chin character, and I think both of those characters are probably the most racist characters in the movie, in that they have hostility towards the other racial group in a way that the other characters don't. Even like the Russell Wong character, the one who plays her brother, he's sort of towing the line, and he definitely is not a fan of her having a relationship with a white guy, but he isn't having the same reaction that the Joey Chin character is, and the James Russo character isn't having the same reaction as the David Caruso character. Do you know what I mean? They're sort of
the brother he's he's a traditionalist. He wants his sister to be like a proper Chinese girl. It's like that can tie into racism definitely, but it's that he wants to be in America, but he wants to stay Chinese.
Yeah.
And a lot of his stuff comes from that. It's not about hating, it's about protecting what he is, his identity, and how he sees himself and sees his family.
Yeah, and the James Russo character is pretty identical to that, I think.
Yeah.
And I think the Joey Chin and the David Caruso characters, I think they're more operating from a place of like deep anxiety and uncertainty about what's going on, and so they're actually. So I think their racism is kind of more like the stereotypical racism that's an outgrowth of fear and concern about just uncertainties in the world, and so. But and I think David Caruso, he has a knack for playing sort of like the racist guy in the group. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you kind of see it when he's cracking those jokes. The other characters aren't as comfortable with those, even if they aren't fans of the Chinese gang. They're just not as they're not enjoying the racist humor the way this guy is. And so I think it's like this. You definitely meant, I think, to sort of pick up on that. And I think where that becomes dangerous is where you see what it leads to with the Joey Chin character, where he literally, ends up shooting the guy's sister and the other guy's brother, So.
And going back to the Italians, I mean, like the brother, when the main character, when he does go off on Caruso's character, and after he's pulled his brother aside, got him away from Caruso, it's like he's not angry about him saying anything about the racism. He's just like, hey, chill out, or it's like he just wants him to stop. It's like he isn't actually outraged at all by any of that. I mean, and I think most of his wanting to keep his brother away from this is he knows it's dangerous. He actually is trying to protect his brother. That is his primary concern there.
And also he's concerned about what you said before too, which is identity, because he talks about like what's wrong with you? Like, you grew up here, like that. Like it's couched and all that kind of stuff, just like it is with the Russell Wong character. And again, I really like how much symmetry there is in that respect in this movie. I think it does a really good job of that.
It's symmetrical without feeling ham-fisted. Sometimes when you go with a movie where it's like, oh, we are not so different from one another. Yeah. It's really it just is. It just works. They are individual characters, but there's just echoes between them.
Well, and they feel like natural outgrowths of that environment too. So it's not like it's like, oh, they're put in there to promote a message. They're put in there to sort of just just be characters that are also logical in the world that they live in. Also, I just like the. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, authentic. They're authentic.
Yeah, they're authentic. Yeah. And also, I think that's why it's meaningful when any of the characters die. Do you know what I mean? Like, you could have, like, when James Russo dies, if he was just the asshole brother throughout the movie, you wouldn't have really cared when he died. But then you have this really sort of surprising scene where, like, the mother comes out and she's like weeping, and she's calling him Alberto. So it's like I don't know. Whenever they have
The
a movie
mother
like,
was great. I gotta single out the mother in this. We haven't mentioned her at all.
Yeah.
But,
she was wonderful.
Fantastic.
No, she was really good, and it's kind of a trope, but when they have a character who's like an Italian or something like that, and they have a name like Albie, and then the mother invokes the actual name, like when the guy dies or whatever, that I don't know, that kind of, there's something magical about that just works for me. Like it tells you a lot about, I don't know, about like there's elements to this guy that you don't know about that the mother does. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That I really like. And also she starts resorting to Italian rather than English, which was surprising because I couldn't really detect an accent when she was speaking in English. And so then when she just suddenly shifts to Italian, it makes me wonder, is she, like, which generation is she, right? Because, you know, she's like very fluent in Italian. She's like, oh my God, Alberto, you know, like all that stuff. And so I thought that scene was really powerful. And and again, it wouldn't have worked if the brother had just been a dick. So you needed the fleshed out characters to do that. And I think the same thing with like one of the guys from a couple of guys from the Chinese gang died. But even those guys who weren't necessarily as fleshed out as James Russo, it still kind of feels like their deaths with meaning in the movie. And also, I don't know, that was the really muscular guy who gets. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the muscular guy, when he dies, there's a poignancy to his death. It's tragic. It's terrible.
Well, I like how they structure that.
He dies alone.
Yeah, because it's like he goes back to his apartment. He's kind of like a quiet guy that I don't feel like I recognized him. I remembered him, but it's like the guy in the group that you never talk to, and then suddenly he opens up, and you're like, oh, okay, you have a personality. And the guy gets home, and like, I don't know, something about him getting home and then like pouring the alcohol on the wound, and it's kind of like you're suddenly sympathizing with him because I don't know, everybody's we've not all been stabbed and ended up having to tend to our wound at home rather than the hospital, but we've all had a rough day where we come home and we fall on the couch in the way he did, and we don't know what the next day is going to bring. And so I like the way that was done. And then when he wakes up and you realize the scene's not yet over, you know, to Matt's point, it just adds a level of poignancy to it. And also it really helps demonstrate just how the uncles and the Italian gangsters are working together.
So. And that guy was just kind of swept up in the mob anyway. I think that's part of the reason you feel bad. It's not like he was one of the guys who was driving any of this. He's just kind of, that's what he does. That's his friends. He's going along with his friends, and it's like it felt like a heavy price for that particular character to pay.
Well, they do a good job of illustrating how it must be to live in a life where at some point you're just sort of swept up into gang activity through all of your social contacts. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise these are all fairly normal people. Like when you see them living their daily lives, they're still living daily lives, and so it gives you that sense of, you know, these are just Tony's friends that he grew up with, and he's just kind of being drawn into this world. You know, so I thought that was. Go ahead.
Shame. It's a shame. It's a shame that people get dragged into that shit.
No, it's very real. Like even if it's not, you know, Italian and Chinese gangs anymore. Like like again, where I used to live just up until a few months ago, we had gang activity all the time, and it was I'm sure very similar. It's similar type of methods for recruiting young people that are just sort of socially linked. But yeah, so I thought that this was just a really spectacular movie. It was I watched it initially, I think out of a sense of completeness. I forget what prompted it, but we saw Ms. 45, and then you and I, Adam, had a conversation where we started to realize there were a number of Abel Ferrara movies that we didn't like. He wasn't really on my radar up until I saw Ms. 45, but I was more aware of his movies than I realized. Like we had both knew of Invasions of the Body Snatchers, and I had seen King of New York before, and so and Bad Lieutenant. but I just never realized those were like from the same guy. I thought of King of New York as a Christopher Walken movie, and The Bad Lieutenant I thought of as a good movie, but again, I thought of that more as like a Harvey Keitel movie. So
Yeah.
at some point I was like, okay, I got to see China Girl now that we're like sort of doing this, and I just thought I was going to be watching it just to kind of get a sense of the complete history, and I was really surprised by how good it was.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I wasn't really sure what to expect from this. So this was a really nice surprise.
Yeah, it's a really entertaining movie, and it's also just, I don't know, I like a lot of, like Adam would know this, like a lot of the Hong Kong sort of action films that I like. They do this thing that a lot of American movies don't, which is they blend a love story and heart with violence in a way where it's not like those two things are intersecting uncomfortably. Do you know what I mean?
That's what I found interesting. It had a very Hong Kong movie vibe to it, even though it's before the era where Hong Kong action movies really started to become well known in America. It's so maybe Ferrara might have been seeing them being a big movie buff, but it's before American movies really started to imitate Hong Kong movies. But there's a feeling he might have been aware of that genre.
Yeah, it definitely touches on that same tone for me, and I think it's the reason why I like it. It's that it's got the violence in the heart, and the heart amplifies the violence in a way that brings it, again, to me, to like a Shakespearean level. Like the reason, like you would want to see Romeo and Juliet, right? And so, again, it just, I think, it just really works in that way.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When I think part of the reason I never cared in the '80s, it's like, oh, another Romeo and Juliet movie. It just the idea feels so trite in of itself that it's been done so many times, and it's just like. But no, he really drilled down to what's important in that story and built something from it. He wrote both the director and writer.
Yeah, Nicky St. John, but
Thank you.
They're both authors. Yeah, they were both authors of it. When you direct a movie, you're an author.
Well, doesn't Ferrara take like a lot of liberties, I'm told, from scripts that he's using? So.
Oh yes.
So yeah, it's I love the style of the movie. The style is just gorgeous. It's I don't know. It's just got it's not overdone either. It's not like you're so overwhelmed with the style. It's just every scene feels a little bit fresh for some reason, because it's again it's very much an 80s movie. I don't want to overplay that this is like not an 80s. It definitely.
Oh, it's very 80s.
Yeah. It feels very 80s, but it stands out as an 80s movie. Is how it stands out.
Yeah, it's a particularly good 80s movie.
Yeah, it is, but I think I think it's still timeless because of how good a job he did, adapting Shakespeare, pretty loosely, of course, but the real emotional guts of the story it's all there, man. It's a perfect movie. It's entertaining. It has everything.
I agree. Yeah, that's the other thing. It has, and again, I think that's why I like movies with love and violence in them, because it's like you get everything. I tend to get bored if it's all just a love story, and violence with no underlying emotion gets very sterile after a while. Like it doesn't have to be a love story, but I need some reservoir of emotion to help carry the violence so that it is meaningful. And again, here it's a perfect blend of those two things. And also, I like how it's a perfect blend, and the two characters that are involved, neither of them are really involved in the violence themselves, only indirectly or against their own will. Like at a certain point, Tony is subjected to some of this violence, but he's not really interested in participating in it. So. At least not in the way that the other guys are. And the girl is definitely not. So I like that they're kind of also separate from the violent conflict that's going on, that they ultimately do get sort of sucked into in the end. But almost more as conscientious objectors than, participants.
Yeah, they didn't
They might
really a part of
they
the
might have saved their
organization.
neighborhood.
They might have what?
Yeah. They might have saved their neighborhood from itself, their respective neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, you could sort of envision, like, after the events of the movie, what happens. Do the, like, do tensions escalate, or do people sort of realize, okay, things have gotten out of hand. We need to, we need to repair the peace. Also, I have the impression that a lot of those characters are sort of fleeing town too, as that's all unfolding. So maybe it'll be pretty cleared out as well by the time the dust settles.
Well, exactly. You got a lot of characters going back to Hong Kong, and it's I don't know.
It's a rich movie, very rich story.
Rich movie, a lot to talk about there.
Yeah. Well, we could probably end it there.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess I think we're either going to continue down this pathway that we're going of watching Abel Ferrara in reverse, or maybe watching the what was it? Year of the Dragon? Was that the one that we were talking about? Maybe seeing.
Michael Cimino.
And but this is definitely a good movie. Again, the name is China Girl. It came out in 1987. You can rent it on Amazon Prime. That's how I watched it. I think I rented it or I bought it. I can't remember.
And $2 more to buy. I wish I had bought it, actually. I'm like, I rented it. I'm like, oh, I could have paid $2 more and actually had it. Oh, well. But,
oh, you got it on DVD? Yeah. Was that DVD or Blu-ray?
Shit. Here, let me turn on the light. Okay.
Your background Blu-ray is fighting you. It's because it's not a person. It won't show us. It's just it. So anything that's not you.
I saw the label. I saw the label, so I do have confirmation that he's got the Blu-ray. You know what I learned, Adam? The reason I do that is because a lot of movies that I've gone back to and wanted to rent again have come down and they're not available on Prime.
I know.
So I realized if I spend the extra few dollars, I can always go back to them and watch them.
I often do that myself. Yeah. I like I said, I didn't really think about it this time because I was like, I'm just gonna watch it, whatever. But I often the $2 more to buy will win me over if I haven't watched something before.
If it's an extreme discrepancy, I won't buy it. But if it's just a couple of bucks, I might be like, okay, let's do this. And then Amazon hopefully can't take it away from me. So
I should have trusted Ferrara on this one. Just bought it, but
I would even say
this is Abel Ferrara.
This is worth the purchase.
I'll buy anything that's Abel Ferrara in physical media because it'll go out of print almost immediately. The streaming services will yank them. It's just the way it works.
If you're not if you are a Ferrara fan, it's a safe bet buying this. It's like, I can't imagine anyone that's a Ferrara fan would not enjoy this movie.
So,
Same goes with Fear City.
Fear City? Okay. I'll have to watch that too.
Yeah, I think that's next on the list, actually.
Excellent.
But, so we'll end it here, and I think we're either going to come back Fear City or Year of the Dragon. And until next time, we will talk to you later.